Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating and, honestly, highly consequential legal battle over a world-leading climate research lab's supercomputing facility. This is the kind of massive tech that ultimately impacts how we all understand global weather patterns. We'll be relying on the latest reporting to piece together exactly how science, federal bureaucracy, and high-stakes national politics have literally just collided right in the middle of a federal courtroom.
Okay, let's dive right into this by asking the core question that sparked today's explainer in the first place. Why in the world would a federal judge suddenly need to step in and halt the transfer of a massive piece of scientific infrastructure? It sounds a bit like the plot of a political thriller, doesn't it? But this is happening right now, and it has some very real-world implications for the future of climate forecasting.
To make sense of this administrative collision, we're going to follow a quick roadmap. First, we'll look at the blocked supercomputer transfer itself, then the entities involved, the underlying political context, why the judge intervened, and finally, the ongoing legal battle.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the blocked supercomputer transfer, and how a judge ended up halting the move to Wyoming.
So here's the breaking news. Federal District Court Judge R. Brooke Jackson has temporarily blocked the U.S. National Science Foundation from transferring control of a major supercomputing center over to the University of Wyoming. And this isn't just your average everyday computer. It's operated by the National Center for Atmospheric Research, which is absolutely a world-leading climate lab. The judge had to step in because moving this critical resource risked seriously degrading the center's scientific capabilities and honestly disrupting the vital forecasting models that we all rely on day to day.
To really understand how we got here, we need Section 2, the entities involved, which is, admittedly, a bit of an alphabet soup.
Let's break down the key players so we can track exactly who is suing whom. First, you have the NSF, or National Science Foundation. They're the federal agency that actually initiated the transfer. They targeted NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, the climate lab itself. In response to this, UCAR, which is the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research, basically the consortium that manages the lab, well, they filed a lawsuit against the government. And the one pulling the strings initially, that would be the OMB, the White House Office of Management and Budget, who directed the NSF's actions in the first place.
But why did they do it? That brings us to Section 3, the political context, focusing on directives and leverage.
Because the timeline of this escalation is incredibly rapid. Just late last year, the OMB directs the NSF to break up NCAR. By early this year, the NSF formally announces its intent to move the supercomputing center. By March, UCAR files their lawsuit to stop it, which leads us directly to today, with a federal judge granting a temporary injunction blocking the whole transfer. I mean, it moved amazingly fast from a White House directive straight to a federal court injunction.
So what exactly motivated that initial directive from the OMB? Looking at the source reporting as neutral observers, we're seeing two distinct political drivers here. Officially, OMB Director Russell Vought targeted the facility for its role in what he specifically termed climate alarmism. But the reporting also points to a widely believed secondary motive, political leverage. The idea is that threatening to strip Colorado of this really prestigious asset was a pressure tactic, specifically a tactic to force the state to release Tina Peters, a former county clerk who was convicted of a 2020 election security breach, from prison.
Which brings us right to Section 4, why the judge intervened and the legal arguments that ultimately won the day.
So the court had to evaluate these competing claims between top atmospheric scientists and the federal government. On one side, UCAR argued, very successfully it turns out, that the looming transfer was already causing irreparable harm. They pointed out it was actively driving away senior staff from the supercomputing center. On the flip side, the NSF countered with what actually sounds like a pretty solid defense. They claimed they hadn't even made a final decision to transfer the facility yet, basically implying the whole lawsuit was completely premature.
However, that defense hit a massive snag, and it was courtesy of their own staff. According to the reporting, an NSF program manager had already told NCR leadership way back in March that the transfer was, quote, a decision made. Turns out it's pretty hard to argue a decision is pending when your own team is running around saying it's a done deal. That one little phrase basically unraveled the government's entire timeline in court.
Which leads us to the final ruling. Judge Jackson ultimately sided with UCAR, and he did not mince words. He called the government's decision arbitrary and capricious. He pointed out that the NSF failed to abide by its own internal processes for getting public feedback, they offered zero explanation for the decision, and provided absolutely no concrete evidence that keeping the supercomputer with NCAR would cause any harm whatsoever. As the judge wrote in his ruling, the agency has identified no deficiency in UCAR's performance as steward.
So where does that leave us right now? Let's look at Section 5, the ongoing legal battle, and what comes next. Because this ruling, it's really just the first skirmish in what promises to be a drawn-out conflict over the whole future of U.S. atmospheric research funding. The supercomputer is safe for now, sure, but there is so much more on the table. UCAR is actively seeking a much broader injunction to stop the NSF from making any additional changes at the lab, and the threats are pretty substantial. The NSF has also threatened to transfer NCAR's research aircraft and even to completely break up its academic centerpiece at the Mesa Lab in Boulder. Because of those wider threats, the state of Colorado has actually stepped in and filed its own separate case to prevent any of these changes.
As we wrap up this explainer, we are left with a huge, lingering question. Colorado's Democratic governor, Jared Polis, has now actually released Tina Peters. So will that concession alter the White House's strategy regarding the lab? And looking at the bigger picture here, what does all of this intense political maneuvering mean for the long-term stability of U.S. climate research infrastructure? It's a striking reminder of how scientific progress and political leverage are often, quite literally, inextricably linked. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.